Hi everyone, I'm here to talk about the void inside your soul, or my soul in this case. This is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about over the last couple of years, and lately in particular it's been on my mind, and I know that a lot of people experience this void inside, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about it, shed the light on what I've experienced, how I've managed to work with this, and hopefully offer some helpful suggestions for you if this is something you deal with. So growing up as a child, I'm trying to remember exactly when I started to first feel it. I think that it was in like first grade when it really started to be pronounced, but I want to say that I started to experience it like in small doses earlier on. And at the time, I would just feel this terrible feeling inside me, like there was something important missing. And at the time, I kind of attributed it to hunger. And I would always imagine that if I could just have pot roast, then everything would feel really great. And then I would have pot roast usually every so often, and it never really solved the problem for very long. And I would experience this pretty frequently from that very, very young age. And I would often wonder if it was because I was trapped at school and I was unhappy at school or didn't like this, didn't like that. But it just, no matter what I did, it was always there. And my family was Christian. And so I also just assumed that perhaps it had something to do with me not being Christian enough. Maybe I didn't believe enough in God and Jesus hadn't really, come into my heart, or there was something wrong with me. And I had a lot of actual like sleepless nights, like worrying that I was like eternally damned because I felt this emptiness inside me. And that's so much in the rhetoric of Christianity is like, Jesus will fill the hole in your heart. And I had this actual very large hole, but it really didn't feel like Jesus was doing anything about it. And it was kind of a bummer. So yeah, I had this hole in my heart, and as the years went on, I sort of just dealt with it. And you can see Florence is here with me, maybe for now until she decides to bite my hand off. But yeah, I kept having it. And then, when I got to be, say like middle school, high school, it started to get a lot worse. Like a lot worse. And I routinely from about age 11 onward felt like I wanted to kill myself, on and off, and felt very, very unhappy and very depressed. And that emptiness was always there. It was sort of like a constant companion in the longest relationship I've had. But I didn't know what it was. And I certainly didn't know how to tell anyone what it was. And I think I tried, on occasions, maybe like to a church camp counselor, and the response I always got was like, Jesus will fill the hole in your heart. Well, guess what? He didn't. So fast forward into college, I think this was. I had finally had the wisdom to enter some much needed therapy. And in therapy, I started to learn a little bit more, and I think I finally started to talk about this experience maybe for the first time, and started to get an idea of what might actually be going on. And as I talked more about it, I learned that this was a phenomenon that other people experience too. And that at the end of the day, like when you really think about it, right, that sensation of void, like you experience it and then it kind of subsides, right? And then it arises again and it passes away. And so you can note the arising and the passing and keep in mind like, oh yeah, right now I'm feeling really voidy, but I'm not going to feel this way forever. Maybe in 5 minutes, maybe in an hour, I'll feel differently, maybe tomorrow. And that began to be comforting. So I used that practice and I found it to be very helpful, but I still didn't really understand why. Why was I having this feeling? So that answer I got actually when I went to graduate school for social work. For those that don't know, social work grad school is mostly where you go to learn to be a therapist. There are different types of social work. I would say that these days it's pretty popular to go to the clinical track and do therapy. So we learn a lot about attachment theory, about trauma, about different mental health disorders, all kinds of stuff. And as I started to read through the DSM, I came across this one disorder. You may have heard of it. It's called borderline personality disorder. And one of the criteria is actually chronic feelings of emptiness. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is a thing? Like, other people like have this too? Like, and they've written about it in books? Like, I had no idea. I felt so validated. And it was funny because I actually went to my therapist at the time, who I was seeing her like, during grad school, we like had these like summers in Massachusetts. And so I would see her during the summertime. So we never like worked together for a super long time. So I think, her perspective was limited, but I remember her saying like, oh, you couldn't have borderline personality disorder because I can feel it when someone has it, and I don't usually like them, and I like you, so you couldn't have the disorder. And I was just sort of like, like that the implication is that if I really did meet criteria for this disorder, that I wasn't someone that people would like. And that was so hurtful and so damaging. And I actually stopped seeing her at some point after that for a couple of reasons, but I never forgot that part of the diagnosis, and I, for a long time kind of kept that in the back of my mind, like, well, it's a trait. Maybe I don't have the full disorder, but it's a trait. It's there. And I began to look more into what causes those chronic feelings of emptiness. So essentially, there's a couple different causes. So a big one is often trauma. So trauma that occurs in early childhood or, somewhere in those formative years where essentially you no longer see the world as a fundamentally safe place. So typically when we're really young, right, like in an optimal situation, we feel like we can trust our parents, we feel like we can trust those around us, we feel like we're gonna be okay, right? And those feelings of okayness essentially get imprinted into our brains, into our hearts, and allow us to go through life with this safe foundation, this stable base. But if you don't get that impression, if you're a kid and you are like, whoa, this place sucks, like I can't trust anybody, nobody really likes me or cares about me, then you're going to imprint a different message and you're going to take that forward. And so typically those feelings of emptiness occur because someone imprinted a more negative view of the world, right? And so that really inhibits our ability to connect with others and to do what's called self-soothing. So that means like if you're upset, you know how to calm yourself down. So think about this, right? Like if you're a little kid and you're upset about something and your caregiver, instead of like, giving you a hug and saying it's going to be okay, they're like, you're horrible. Like, why are you bothering me? I'll give you something to cry about, those kinds of things. You won't learn those normal ways of being able to say to yourself like, oh yeah, it's all right. Don't worry. We're going to be okay. It's fine. Right. Like you learn like nothing's really okay. Right. Nothing's really okay. And I have to always be on alert. Right. And there's a sense of hypervigilance that goes along with that. So trauma can be a big cause of this voidiness. Sometimes it's not necessarily trauma in the way that we think of it, like, severe sexual abuse or blatant physical abuse. Sometimes it's more the chronic, what we might call like emotional neglect, where someone just doesn't feel loved, right? Maybe the parent really wants to express love, but the way that they express love is really different than how the child receives it, or they're just not on the same page, and the child's feeling really out in the cold, and it's not being remedied. And so that's an instance as well where you might see the voidiness coming up. So by the time I finished grad school and started working, I had learned a lot, about trauma, about why I had this void. I had even learned a lot of coping strategies, for what to do when I was feeling particularly voidy. But I at that point really believed that was kind of as good as it was going to get, that the best I could hope for was like crisis management, and that I would sort of always be one step behind my feelings, and that, this feeling of voidiness would always be there waiting to swallow me whole, at the first chance it got. And I actually told someone that. It was my clinical supervisor at the time, which is, it's not exactly a therapist, but they are a therapist, and they're sort of helping teach you how to do therapy essentially. And I told him this, and he was kind of like, wait, what? Like, are you for real? Like, seriously? And at the time I was like, yeah, like obviously. And he sort of laughed, and I am glad he said it to me because he was really right. Like, I was definitely not maxed out in my growth potential by a long shot. And it's funny because there's a lot of different ways to approach these chronic feelings of emptiness, right? Like, we can talk about the mindfulness aspect of like learning to be able to dissect the actual experience. Like, what does it feel like in your body? How long does it last for? Can you observe the frequency, the intensity, and look at it more as a passing phenomenon and like keeping that impermanence in the back of your mind? So those are good like coping skills for like when it's happening, here's how you can stay okay. So the flip side of that is like, is there a way that we can make that experience less frequent and maybe in some cases eliminate it altogether, though that's probably less likely, to be honest. So there's different types of trauma therapy, things like EMDR or cognitive processing therapy, right? There's all kinds of therapy that propose that they are assisting in the healing process from trauma, which this is often in some way related to. So for me, actually what happened is that it's what we call in therapy a corrective emotional experience, where maybe when you've related to others, you've always had kind of these negative experiences, but then in therapy or in a friendship or somewhere, you have a chance to have a new experience, one that meets your needs, one that is healthy, one that is safe, which is really important, obviously. And so I had that, and it was not something I ever thought would happen. Like, to be really honest, I had so much grief over what emotional needs of mine didn't get met when I was younger. So much grief. And I never thought that connecting with another person could help me with that. In fact, there's some truth to like, you can't expect another person to literally fill the hole in your heart. Like, that's not actually possible, right? Like, we have that thing where like, they're with their boyfriend or their girlfriend and they're like, oh, like if they could just show me that they love me enough, like I would suddenly feel satiated. And it's like, yeah, probably not. We've all seen that play out, never ends well. But when you can have a really intentional and in a very specific set of circumstances, right? Like in a clinical, technical manner, there's a way in which we can connect with others, essentially where they can become a new imprint into our internal schema, right? So essentially it's like we take a software program of this person and we override the old programs of our parents and upload this new program with new voices, new messages, new viewpoints, etc. And if you were to ask me, like, how does that work exactly? I'm like, I don't fucking know. Like, it's really complicated and it's more magic than science, more art. Like, I don't know. But it happens like magic. So for me, that experience was actually with my clinical supervisor. And I had a number of, I think, foundational experiences as well with like therapists proper. But it was one of those things where like I felt understood in a way that I'd never felt understood by anyone in my entire life. And there were certain parameters in the relationship, so there was like a lot of safety there. And then, there was this constant experience of like, once a week we would get together and talk about my cases, and I would feel understood. I would feel like there was a place where I could go and I could be myself, and there was someone that would see me and understand me, and things would feel like I would feel like, oh my God, when I'm with this person, I feel okay, right? And I remember one day thinking like, God, like, what's going to happen when I get all my supervision hours? Like, how will I feel okay anymore? Because I had just gotten used to not feeling okay. And this feeling of feeling okay was really a new feeling for me. I don't know, maybe think of a time in your life where things just felt really wrong and awful, and then imagine feeling like that every single day. Like, I don't think people really understand, what kind of a burden that is. So like I really treasured having this experience with someone where like I was like, wow, like I feel really great around this person. And it's so funny because over time, right, like we wrapped up our hours and life moved on, and I remember thinking a bit after I had already ended supervision, like, I actually feel really okay a lot of the time, and I'm not even meeting with him anymore. Like it was like I had that magic upload where, you know, the okayness that we made together was suddenly like, had like soaked in, you know, and was like permanently a part of my psyche. And I don't know how that works exactly, like really, like no clue. However, it was great, and I'm so grateful that it happened, because like since then, like I've like been observing, and I actually have like way fewer void experiences. Like it still comes up once in a while, but it usually is pretty brief, and it usually isn't super intense. And like I just feel more like I think how normal people feel, where they're like, yeah, you know, I'm gonna be okay, like I'm gonna figure this out, you know. I'm like, oh, that's why people like doing this. Okay, I get it now. So I wanted to offer my story with some encouragement, because I know that other people are struggling with this void, and I want you to know that that's not just you, and it doesn't exist just because you're uniquely horrible or broken in some way, right? Like there's a reason why that's there, and there's a way that you can learn how to tolerate it better and potentially make it less frequent for you, less intense. So I'm going to offer a few different specific techniques. I'll recap for you. So the first technique is remembering impermanence, right? No feeling lasts forever, whether you're angry or sad or happy, you know, they come and then they go. And it's the same with the void. The void is a feeling, it's a sensation. It's a very unpleasant sensation for the most part, but a sensation that will arise and will pass, right? So that's point number one. Point number two is to be really mindful of the sensation when you're having it, right? Like you can sit, like take a moment, you can like keep your eyes open or closed, right? And you just notice, like, do I feel it in my chest? Do I feel it in my stomach, right? Is there any pain? How intense is it, right? Maybe it's too overwhelming to even try and dig in there. Maybe you're just like, on a scale of 1 to 5, right now it's like a 7, you know, or maybe you're like, oh, well, I feel a little voidy. It's like a 2, you know, so you can rate the intensity. You could try and draw a representation of it, right? You could do an interpretive dance of your void. You can find a way to transform it into something other than just this overwhelming, consuming experience. So that is point number 2, mindfulness. Number 3 is about, you know, that corrective emotional experience. So finding ways to rewrite your computer program. And this could be in therapy. That's a really great place to do it. Group therapy is particularly effective for this. It could be, you know, through journaling or through a really wonderful friendship. You know, it could be a lot of different things. Elizabeth Smart talked about working with horses in her recovery, right? So there's a lot of ways that we could approach trying to have positive experiences where we can learn to feel safe in our bodies, in our worlds. Point number 4 is important. It's to shine a light on your void, right? Like, it can't be a true dark void if there's light everywhere. And I think we feel a lot of shame for having the experience we do. But if you can find people to share with and to say, wow, like I'm having such a voidy day, like I just feel awful, you know, and that person isn't going to judge you, is going to be supportive, is going to be there for you, that can be really wonderful. Sometimes I've had experiences where I've told someone, oh yeah, the void is just crushing me today. And you know what? The void went away, right? So you just never know. And either way, it's better to suffer with a friend than to be isolated and have to suffer alone. Number 5. 5 is about making your own meaning. So think about, what was his name? Viktor Frankl, very famous, very wonderful man, you know, talks about meaning is what allows us to, you know, not only survive, but really to move past really severe trauma in our lives or very difficult experiences. If we can find a way to understand, to make meaning of what's happened to us, it really, really ups our chances of having, you know, a life that isn't controlled by whatever just dragged us down. So that's a process that I think is very individual, you know, and there's no one right or wrong way to make meaning. Some people do it through their spiritual beliefs, right? Through church or spiritual practices, meditation. There's really no prayer, whatever works for you. Some people might do it through art. or through, finding their purpose in life and doing work that gives back to the community. It's just, you've got to try it out and see what helps you feel like you're fulfilling some kind of purpose, that you're doing something that, is making the world a better place. So yeah, thanks for listening to my story. I hope that my suggestions for working with the void can be of use to you. If you are really struggling and you are in danger of hurting yourself, please consider getting professional help. You can always reach out to the National Suicide Hotline. I've included it below. I want everyone to know that you can feel better. Just because you feel one way right now doesn't mean you'll always feel that way, and there are a lot of things you can do to work on having more positive experiences in your life, and I wish you all the best.